Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to the January Cabinet meeting. So the usual announcements. If you hear the fire bell, please leave by the front entrance, meet at the War Memorial. There are toilets on the landing, as you know. Please put your mobile phone on silent. Anybody present can film those taking part in the meeting, but not the public gallery. And remember to use the microphone when speaking. Right. Apologies, Dan?
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Highland, Sismy, Fullpaps and Wilson.
Okay. Then moving on swiftly to item 2, just to remind you that if you have any interests in the items that are coming up that you need to declare, then do so now or at the time. Item 3 is the minutes of the 12th of November. Can I sign those as a correct record? Thank you. Item 4, public questions. And you're not the public, Councillor Knight. No, yeah. Unless you want to resign. So we don't have any public questions in advance. Moving on. Any questions to members of the Cabinet on things for which the Cabinet is responsible? Councillor Steele, then Councillor Knight. And anybody else? Councillor Soshin. Right. Mike Steele.
Me first.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an issue from my...
Okay, thank you. Councillor Moore, do you want to have a go at that one?
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Yes, the land you're referring to is at Back Lane, I believe, off Essex Regiment Way. Yes, it was secured for tree planting and, as I understand, used the budget that had been assigned for the Woodland Creation Scheme and was in the budget for that purpose. And the land is sufficient size to accommodate the remaining trees that we required to plant to meet our targets for 2030. Mr. Nicholson, can you enlighten us on the costs involved?
I don't think we should be declaring the price paid in the public arena, but we can advise separately.
The actual sum paid is confidential, but as Councillor Moore says, it was within the budget that we previously allocated in the capital programme.
Is it shown in the budget
now? No, because we had a budget of 400. Phil, can you remember? Is it 400,000 in the capital programme?
There's a budget within the capital programme for trees, and I'm just looking it up now. Tree planting, there is 1.6 million in the budget for that, but we didn't spend that all on the land.
So am I not allowed to know how much this particular piece of land...
We can write to you on confidential basis afterwards.
Yes, please.
And in terms of public access, Councillor Steele, we are developing this as a community and a tree planting volunteer site. So there are rights of way across, well, between the sections of land, and it's adjacent to the river at Chelmer and also the Chelmer Valley Nature Reserve, and it links in very nicely with the public rights of way there. And in due course, we'll invite volunteers in. We've already had one planting session this year and beginning to understand the landscape and the ecological value of that.
Thank you. When you write to me, could you tell me why it's confidential as well?
It's only the price that's confidential. Because because it was a commercial transaction.
It's a
Commercial transaction, we don't usually.
to be confidential. Does everything we buy, is it confidential?
Yes, we usually do them as part 2 items, which is one we've got tonight, for example. So it's confidential to the authority.
It would be a matter of
It may be at a future point in time, it may become, but at this moment in time, usually when you purchase land, you wouldn't say what the amount was you were purchasing it for, because it can prejudice your negotiations and your position. Yeah, prior to registration it would be. I don't know what's happened with this particular site. I'm not familiar with exactly what's happened with this one.
Okay, Councillor Knight.
I have a question and some comments about the budget. I would prefer to do it at the budget time. Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, if that's the only topic that you've got, we'll come to that shortly. And what's your area question?
Now I would like to make a comment on item 10.1, and I'd do it at the time
Yeah, okay.
of that item.
Yep, definitely. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. We come on to the budget with Councillor Davison has first of 4 items to keep us amused this evening.
Sorry, Chair. My computer decided to withdraw cooperation just at the wrong moment. Anyway, I've got some written notes. So, I don't know how much debate we're going to have tonight. Right. I was expecting that we might be back in, 3 weeks' time for a... Yeah, for a more substantial discussion. Let me just set out the position from my perspective. So, this has been the most difficult budget I've experienced. In some ways, it's just like any other budget. Over the last 20 years, all the budgets that you had and the budgets we have, because I'm proposing a balanced budget for next year. We'll continue to deliver all the services that the residents rely on. I'm proposing an increase in council tax at the level set by the government, which is a shade below 3% this year, which is what you did virtually every year, what we've done every year. Our finances remain sound, our reserves are healthy, we're investing to improve services. So what's different about this? Well, actually, what's different is that the finances have been under pressure for a long time. And we've watched other councils run out of money because this is not just a Chelmsford phenomenon, it's all over the country, isn't it? Local government finance has been in a mess. We didn't think we could go on. The Conservative government failed to help, but surely Labour was going to fix it. That's what we all thought. They can't allow this to carry on. Last autumn, we were disturbed when, on the 30th of October, Labour just stood back and failed to help. And since then, they've announced that they plan to take even more funding away from Chelmsford. So I'm going to cut out some of my comments and we can come back to them. But that's essentially the context that we're talking about here, a final abandonment by the government, which is shocking. So what we've got is a budget for this year that balances. And I'd like to thank the officers for the fantastic work they've done in getting us to the point where our 25-26 budget does balance. I think we're hugely indebted to the brilliant team of officers we've got here. And as the peer review noted, we're delivering commendable outcomes for the people of Chelmsford, and this budget will enable us to continue doing that. But there is a bit I want to say about the future, because once Council's approved the budget for 25-26, Cabinet will need to begin putting together a financial plan to address the longer-term deficit. And a key part of that is going to have to be reducing the cost of providing temporary accommodation. We'll be redoubling our efforts to build more affordable homes. Councillor Foster's leading on that. We should be in no doubt about the impact the rise in homelessness is having on our budget, and therefore, effectively, on what else we can afford to do. And the numbers can be staggering. That's the bit I really wanted to get across. The additional expense falling on the City Council to rent one extra affordable home of 2, 3, 4 bedrooms is over £15,000 a year. That's, if you need 10, that's £150,000 plus. If If you need 33, that's £500,000 added to our budget. And we've got over 500 in temporary accommodation. And this is money that can only be spent once. If we can't save this from our housing budget, effectively we'll have to save it from elsewhere. So I don't think we can underestimate the scale of the challenge that we're facing. But I'll pause here because I know Councillor Knight's got some questions, and I know that Councillor Whitehead may have a limited amount of questions.
Yes, Councillor Knight, yeah.
Well, firstly, as always, well done to Phil and his team, and also Councillor Davidson for his invaluable input to the budget. It's an excellent piece of work, there's no doubt about that. All the answers that you need are there. You need digging out because they're not easy to find, but they are there. But I think Councillor Davidson has sent me a different budget than he's got, because it's not the way I interpret it. And it's only my interpretation. I've not discussed it with anybody else, so it's my view. I think this is the 5th budget from the Liberal Democrats, and I've praised them before for the way they've looked after the money. 6th, is it? My apologies, 6th. The way they've looked after the council's money, my money, taxpayers' money, because they've done a pretty good job overall. That's not to say they couldn't have done better. They could, and I'm going to come on to that in a minute if I can. I remember the original financial statements used to be glossy and lots of colour, and it was all green, which is positive, and there was a little bit of red, which was negative, obviously. But it was overwhelmed by the green. If you did that today, it would be overwhelmed by the red, which is why you're not doing it. If you dig in amongst all the numbers, the prognosis from the 6 is downwards. And he says himself, or you say yourself in the paper, you'll run out of existing reserves in 28, 29. No, I can't see how that's positive, but your interpretation will be that it is. So when I think about it, I think back to, for me, what was the gold standard for the political management of a city council, which was under the late John Galley and Councillor Whitehead as a team, where they provided 16 years of very sound financial management. And I know you're thinking, well, they haven't had to deal with COVID, they haven't had to deal with inflation, they haven't had to deal with Liz Truss, they haven't had to deal with homelessness, they haven't had to deal with the present Labour government. No, they haven't, but they did deal with government grants of, I think, 9 million at the end, which was tapered down. So they had a pretty significant headwind to work into, and they did it. And they provided you with a pretty decent balance sheet that you took over, which is why you had all those green things in the first budget or two, by the by. So invoking the gold standard, as my interpretation of it, you've made a few mistakes which are coming back to bite you on the bum, if you don't mind me saying that. One was you shouldn't have sold the playing field. That would have given you another 3 or 4 years beyond 28, 29, where you have a little bit headroom. Who knows, you may have got a government that would have helped you in 28 or 29, as it will be. I don't know, but it would have given you a little bit of headroom there. And these things, some of these things are at the margin, but you're going to enter into a development project, which we've spoken about here before, and again, that's fundamentally wrong, because it comes back to the way you're dealing with the finances here, I think. You're unable to control the costs in a development program, joint development program, and that's the key to it. You can't control the costs. The costs are controlled by somebody else. So those are the two things on the capital programs. On the daily revenues, your costs are increasing more than your revenues. Now, you know what the result of that is. To be fair to you, you're not a Woking, you're not a Thurrock, you're not a Birmingham, you're not a Nottingham or all the others. You have looked after it pretty well, but you could have done better, as I've said, and here's where you can do better in the future. You need to go back to the basics. I'm sorry if that's a bad expression from the past, but I can't put it any other way. Go back to the basics, which is basically expenditure. If it's not looking after rubbish, if it's not burying people, if it's not making sure your planning department is working efficiently, if it's not making sure the city centre is spick and span, if it's not doing things that you're statutory required to do, and a few, I'm paraphrasing, I'm making it nice and simple, it's metaphorical, but you can see my direction of travel. If it's none of those, don't do it. Do not do it. And you'll soon see, as an organisation, where the money doesn't need to be spent, and those people that are efficiently employed, spending money in the right areas, and then you can make the decisions as to, well, the obvious decisions that arise from that. So that's the budget I see. If you don't, and the sooner, or with all of these things, you have to take action as soon as you see it. Because if you leave it go, then it only gets worse, and the decision making is even worse after that. So if you want a question, will you do what I say? Will you do what I say?
Right, any other questions on the budget?
Well, yeah.
Yes, Councillor Whitehead. Yeah. Oh, do you want to respond to?
That one first.
No.
Well, we normally do it on the basis that there's questions, and then I respond to the questions at the end. That, as I understand it, is the process.
Yeah.
If the chair wishes me to do it differently, then I shall.
Yeah,
comply.
I shall ask Councillor Whitehead to go next.
Okay, yeah. But that, as a council, to be fair, you can actually say as much as you like tonight, can't you? But there we are. Yeah, I wasn't going to, as I said earlier on, go through it line by line as well, really. And I'm grateful for some of the comments that made, but maybe not all, in the sense that the budget for our normal day-to-day expenditure, the budget gap that we've got, are ones that we've all seen before, and there's various ways you can cut this cake, but there aren't actually very many ways that you can solve the problem, and therefore I'm not going to go line by line through it and say, why are you doing this and why are you doing that at this stage. Will we say a bit more at council? Possibly, but as you know, my normal comments are about capital, and that was sort of touched upon by Councillor Knight just there, really. Your method of apportioning capital and ours differs. Interestingly, the question on the trees was an interesting one just now. Why did we buy a piece of land when we didn't need to buy a piece of land when we got John Chilham playing fields and all sorts of other places to plant trees? I don't understand that. And it's the way that you expend capital, which is what was being said earlier on, for which you and I will inevitably disagree. We won't mention Waterside tonight and anything else like that. We've got another item coming later on, and that's actually a chance at which you can actually say what we paid for the other thing, because we'll be in a session then by ourselves. But no, I don't want to say other than you've only got 2 years to do it, because we're all going to get thrown out by the Labour government anyway, aren't we? And that's the real worry about all of this. I mean, you've got to forecast to 2930 on here, a real optimistic picture of life, I think. We'll be lucky to make 27, 28, I think. And that's the difficulty that we have. If only we knew, everybody thinks they know. Was it Grant Thornton's given us 16 different options or so on? But I've got a 17th anyway, so that was not much use. But we are in a situation where you've got to budget for the next 2 years, effectively, really. I think that's the key thing. Can we get through in that period? Yes, I'm sure that we can. Will you allocate your capital differently? Well, that's for us to discover at another time. And the homeless situation was a sort of hole in my bucket one, I'm afraid, really, isn't it? The better we are at housing people, the more they come here to get housed. And that's our difficulty. They don't want to go to Stoke-on-Trent. I think I'm kind to anybody from Stoke-on-Trent, but you know what I mean. But they want to come here, and because we are so good at dealing with people who come here, more people come. And so you have an unfortunate sort of endless task that I don't envy you having, I must admit, really, because there is no simple solution to it. The government has stolen 11 million, isn't it, so far, from our money over the years? Again, that point was sort of being made. But, of course, it was much more complicated than that. We used to build social rented homes, and they gave us the money back, didn't they? That was a wonderful scheme, really. If only carried it on, we'd actually have properties. But that was when I first came here, when you were still in charge of the earlier stage, as it were. Yeah, I mean, we'd spend money, and government would give it straight back to us. It's housing grants. Instead of which we spend money now, and they take more away. And so we, as a council, collectively, can't do a lot other than deal with it in the way that you've put it together. So that, as I say, we'll talk about capital another time, really, but on the day-to-day budget items here, well, we can always collect our waste 4 times. Was it 4 weeks now at Bristol, we're suggesting, and so on, really? God, I mean, they must be mad. But nonetheless, I think the majority of residents are still satisfied, as you were saying earlier on, with day-to-day services. And it remains our belief, your belief, that they are the key things. But actually dealing with them at this stage in ways where minimum wages are put up without anybody telling us national insurance will give you all the money back. They said, oh, sorry, we didn't really actually mean that. We actually give you half the money back if you're lucky. And all of that is making life very difficult for this council. So from the point of view of do I have a final question, the answer is we will talk about other matters at other times. I'm not going to criticise any particular item on this one tonight. Thank you.
No?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't entirely subscribe to Councillor Knight's approach. I think that you listed the things that have been particularly difficult that we've had to deal with in the last period. Completely right. In the period up to 2019, the government was reducing the grant, and the response to that was to find additional sources of income. So you would use some capital, you'd buy a property, and you generate a rental income. That route has been stopped. You just can't do that now. The government has changed the rules, so they've blocked that. The broader answer is, back in those days, there was a significant amount of capital that had been generated back in, 2002, when we sold off the council housing. That generated some cash, and over a significant period, that was used for various purposes for the benefit of Chelmsford. And in Councillor Galley's last budget, which would have been 6 years ago, virtually to the day, you were forecasting that that money was going to run out and you were going to be going into external borrowing. And we're still forecasting that we will be going into external borrowing. So I'm not sure that there's any great difference there, but I don't think that I certainly don't accept Councillor Knight's criticisms of that. I think the specific bits which come back to the capital programme, we've had this conversation every budget, really, every year, and my answer has always been, it's not about the scale of the capital programme, but whether it's affordable. We want the largest capital programme in a sense that we can, because that's our ambition, to do a wide range of things for the benefit of the people of Chelmsford, but it has to be affordable. And clearly what the forecast through to 2030 is saying is that we're going to have another review and come back in a year's time with next year's budget, having thoroughly reviewed what is affordable. So to that extent, I take your point. Yes, I agree, costs are up more than revenues. Because the basic revenue, the council tax, has gone up 14% in the last 5 years. So for every £100 that you were paying in council tax 5 years ago, you're paying £114 now. Some of our costs have gone up enormously. So the housing is the one where every £100 we were spending then is now £400 we're spending. But I just note that Councillor Knight's recipe, will I adopt your solution? No, I won't adopt your solution, because that was essentially that we will stop spending money on parks, stop spending money on other discretionary items, and retrench and only spend money on the mandatory items. and we will have a review, but I'm not giving a commitment that we will stop our spending on parks, thank you. Councillor Whitehead, I don't think we would accept your analysis that we're too good at housing and we're sucking people in. We're only housing people who've got a connection here. So I don't think that's quite right. But subject to that, yeah, we've seen the gap before, as you say, and we'll deal with it. We will spend the next 11 months or so going through and working out how to deal with it. Once we've got through this budget, we can talk about aspects of capital, but I've already given you the overview of that. And yeah, it's the local government review means that to some extent the goalposts are being moved before we get to the end of the period we're looking at. But what I would like to say is that without commenting on the future intentions of any particular councillors, I would like to ensure that I hand over the finances to whatever comes next in a reasonable state so that they can be picked up and run with, passing on the baton, not dropping the baton. So that will be the way that I'll be approaching it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, if I can, I'll add a couple of points. I think what perhaps Councillor Knight underestimates is the systemic change of budgeting over the last 5 years. If I was trying to think of a metaphor, and I've come up with whack-a-mole. When Councillors Galley and Whitehead were in charge, and you had the occasional relatively small moles that would pop up and have to be whacked on, and get those little problems under control. And you could do that by making a few savings here and there. I mean, 10 years ago, Councillor Galley's budget got rid of 26 members of staff. And you know, that was quite a significant change in service delivery, and some of those have had to be unpicked since. But that was the approach, and you could, if it wasn't for the cost of temporary accommodation, the budget would be broadly okay, because we'd have a few small challenges that could be dealt with a few small changes. The sheer scale of the TA problem, if you look at the graph on page 18, you can just see how dramatic the costs of temporary accommodation are. It's 502, I don't know, this week, 505 homeless households. So when Councillors Galley and Whitehead were in charge, it never went above about 70. And we've just gone through the roof. And as Councillor Davison said, that costing us on average £13,000 per family, times 430 more than it used to be. So the cost of temporary accommodation are just an existential financial problem. And then the other moles pop up, like the national living wage, which the government sets and we have to pay. And then at the last minute, they said, oh, national insurance contributions as well, we'll refund that. Oh, no, we won't. We're going to drop an extra 630,000 on you, which we've had to find in the last 3 weeks. So it's a constant challenge, and I, as Councillor Davison said in his final remark, I do have to take Councillor Whitehead to task for implying that it's people from outside. These are Chelmsford families who become homeless. The single biggest cause of homelessness in Chelmsford is domestic violence, or second biggest, and the biggest is young people being evicted by their parents or other adults that they're living with, and they are Chelmsford households that we have to look after, and unfortunately we can't house them all in Chelmsford, so they have to go to other districts. So none of this is easy, but if we want to improve services, you have to invest in them, and on page 24 there are some things that we are going to invest in, and we're not going to take risks with the capital programme. It's carefully managed, but as Councillor Davison said, the reserves of capital have been spent mostly during Councillor Whitehead's period, so there wasn't a massive capital reserve left. And as Councillor Davison was just saying, the previous administration was planning to borrow. We haven't yet, but we are going to, for example, invest at the Bewley Park new sports ground. We're going to invest at the Ice Leisure Centre, at the Chelmsford Sport and Athletic Centre, and some of the other projects which are outlined on page 24 in table 12A. So there is some good news in here, despite all of the bad news on the revenue budget. So there we go. That's our budget for 25-26. Councillor Davison.
I think I have to move the recommendation, don't I? Before I do, can I just reconcile two different figures that we've given between us this evening? I said that for 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, it was costing over 15,000 a year, and you said the average was 13,000. The average overall is 13,000. That includes a lot of 1 bedroom properties, and those are cheaper. The average, therefore, for 2, 3 and 4 bedrooms, as I say, is over 15,000 each. So with that clarification, I move that Cabinet recommend the budget report to Council and approve the 2 delegations and the changes to fees and charges determined by Council on the 18th of December. So formally as in the report.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Well, I'll do that then. Yes, that was agreed. Thank you. So moving on to 6.2 is the financial strategies for the next year.
Yes, if I can find the right page. Okay, the strategies. I'm not going to say a lot about this. There are 3 strategies. They come to Cabinet every January. The Treasury Management and Investment strategies are recommended by the Treasury Management and Investment Subcommittee, which I chair. And we had a full debate about them last week. For Treasury Management, we're moving from a focus on investing surplus cash to how we manage the external borrowing that we're moving into. On investment, it's simply, I think, an update of the current year's strategy. The capital strategy hasn't been reviewed by TMISC. It's essentially a part of the budget, but it has to be a separate report. So we've really been talking already about the capital strategy, I think. If there are any questions, then I'll happily answer those.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no specific ones. I mean, I'm a member of the TMSC as well, so that we have discussed these. What I would say, I'll come back to you to full council with a full list of all the expenditure on property and so on, really, because I think you slightly underestimated the amounts that we earned as opposed to got from just the sale of council houses. But now is not the moment to do that, so I will allow this to continue.
Okay. No other questions? Is that report agreed?
In which case, I will move the report and Cabinet recommend the strategies to Council, and I hope somebody will second that.
Okay. Yes, seconded. Right. Agreed. Is that agreed? Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. So moving on, the local council tax support scheme for next year.
I'm hoping that these, this one and the next one are pretty straightforward. There's a requirement to approve a local council tax support scheme each year. The proposal is that we simply maintain the current scheme. This is very important support for lower income households. Pensioners who qualify for the maximum amount pay no council tax. There's a 100% reduction. Those of working age who qualify can have a maximum 77% reduction, so they pay at least 23%. We can't afford to make the scheme more generous. We've just been talking about that. And we can't ask residents on low incomes to accept a less generous scheme, because that would, I mean, it would be wrong to place a disproportionate burden of helping our budget onto those who are least able to pay that. So essentially, we are where I'm proposing for next year, we should be where we are this year. And can I just add one further thing? Ideally, I would have brought this item to the November Cabinet, because that would have given us a more realistic opportunity. If we concluded we wanted to consult on changing it, there would have been more time in which to do that. The sad loss of Councillor Grundy and the December by-election that generated meant that that was cancelled. That meeting was cancelled, so we find ourselves debating it tonight. But I am aiming to bring this report in the autumn in future rather than to the January meeting.
Any questions? No.
In that case, I move that Cabinet recommend the current scheme to Council for 2025-26.
Seconded. Agreed? Yeah. Agreed. Thank you. And finally, Councillor Davidson, the business rate changes.
Yeah, finally, the discretionary business rate relief policy. This is another annual feature, but not one I'm very happy about, I have to say, because we collect business rates on behalf of the government. We follow the government's policies on that, almost entirely. Every so often, the government decides it wants to change the rules. When it does so, it says that Parliament is awfully pressed. There isn't enough time to take a short bill to Parliament, get it passed, and get the changes made, in which case they'd automatically flow through. Instead, the government writes to hundreds of councils up and down the country, asking them to change their rules. Hundreds of teams of officers draft reports, and hundreds of councils, in fact, hundreds of councils in Cabinet have to agree those changes, debate them. The amount of waste for a government that wants to improve growth, you'd think that they might have worked out that this is unproductive time and it would be better if they changed their approach. But the fact is that they've changed what they want the rules to be. As long as we follow the rules, they will reimburse us. If we collect too little tax, we'll have to make the difference up, and if we collect too much tax, we'll have to hand it over anyway. So, to the detriment of Chelmsford businesses. So, I am proposing that we change the rules in order to ensure that Chelmsford's businesses pay the right amount of tax and no more, and no less because we can't afford to collect less. So I move that Cabinet agree the revised policy for 2025-26.
You can agree and second simultaneously, in my view. Right, let's move on to item 7. Councillor Moore on the Anglia-Ruskin University Master Plan.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm presenting this evening a report outlining the vision for Anglia-Ruskin University and its strategic master plan within Chelmsford's city centre. Master planning is an essential part of the council's operations, and there is a duty for educational institutions to evidence that they are also planning for the future. And the master plan process is a holistic approach. The master plan itself can be found in your documents this evening, page 165, and I am very happy to support the recommendation following approval from Policy Board that this moves forward to Cabinet for discussion this evening. We have a policy within our local plan, Policy DM22, which relates specifically to education establishments and states that extending or expanding existing educational facilities will be supported subject to their accordance with the criteria of other relevant policies within our local plan. The policy goes on to state proposals for the expansion of Anglia-Ruskin University and Writtle University College, which is now aligned with them, will be considered in the context of agreed master plans. So it's a very important document. Most importantly, with master planning, you need to involve a wider community and a really diverse mix of stakeholders. And this master plan, if you haven't already had time to study it, it really is a dynamic and a flexible framework going forward. It needs to help guide the future development of the campus, which is within our city centre, but also bordering the riparian river landscape. And it actually embraces that within the master plan too. There's been a serious level of engagement too with stakeholders, including the staff and students themselves and the wider Chelmsford community, including neighbours to the campus and the City Council. The officer who prepared the report this evening, Sally Rogers, I'm very grateful for her. She has been the main point of contact going through the master plan process and continues to be a support and advice to the team at Anglia Ruskin. The key points of this plan are extensive analysis and engagement. It's been based on thorough site analysis and meaningful engagement, as I've said, with the stakeholders. Also flexibility. We don't know what the future will hold for education. We can tell that science is advancing, and we can tell that study is changing in its pattern. So we need to be flexible and be sure that elements can be implemented as different needs arise. The campus is viewed as essentially a living entity, and that will require continuous dialogue with its own community and its neighbours within the city centre. And it needs to be an inclusive environment. The goal is to create a welcoming environment that aligns with the university's ambitions going forward. So the Anglia Ruskin University Master Plan's already undergone significant student, staff and community consultation, as well as review and consultation by Chancellor Policy Board. And the attached officer report will also offer more detail to you, and I hope very much that Cabinet will approve the master plan this evening. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Armstrong.
Just on the note, obviously discussing the flexibility of it, of course that's sensible. The current proposed expansion is all great news for Chelmsford and is lovely and it's a tribute to their success, and I'm glad that we've engaged with them. One of the things with it potentially expanding is just making sure we keep engaged with the housing provision for students. Universities have a habit of increasing rental prices in their area because students often when they're joined together can collectively pay more than some of our own residents. So it's making sure that as and if the plan adapts, that we keep the pressure off our local housing market for the dynamic housing market of student accommodation, because I don't want it to put undue pressure on you, Councillor Foster, either. So it's just working that through. I'm not making any criticism to the master plan as it is, but it's just as and how it's adapting, can we keep that as a focus? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Councillor Armstrong. That's very constructive. Ms Rogers, is there any cap or anything we can do as a local authority to ensure that students' accommodation is at
the master plan does focus, if you look at page 30 of the master plan, it talks about opportunities. And it talks about the residential zone, and one of the key elements of this master plan is to improve the student accommodation, because it's recognised that it is quite outdated at the moment. So yes, that is one of their priorities, to improve that whole civic space at the front of the site, which includes that area of student accommodation. So absolutely, that is one of their priorities.
And in terms of the cost of accommodation, it's up to the university.
That's correct. That's not something that we could set through planning.
Thank you.
I think there's something that the Chief Exec and I have raised with the Vice-Chancellor when we've met him about accommodation and how we can, as a council, work with them to ensure that it doesn't unduly negatively impact on our local housing market. But it just underlines the need why we need to build more homes of all types. No other questions? No? Okay, so is that report agreed? Thank you. Right. That's item 7. There isn't any urgent business? No, and the financial ones go to council. So those are reports that go to council. Okay. Right, well that's it. We have one item on confidential business, so I move under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972 that the public and press be excluded from the meeting for item 10.1 on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information. under the 72 Act.